if we look at the research, if we look at all the data that's coming out, we know that BMI is not a very good standard of health. Waist circumference is a much better standard because waist circumference looks at where your actual fat lies in the body. If your fat lies in the midsection, if you've got a lot of, visceral and subcutaneous fat, we know that's close to organs, that's active. There's a lot of downside to it. But we also know...
Why is it that the BMI is a poor metric now as far as metabolism is concerned? And then could you outline what the 4 metabolic types are?
I've been a dietitian for over 20 years. And I feel like for the first 19 and a half years of my career, someone would come in, we would look at their BMI, and we would assess them based on that number. So we would look at that BMI and say, okay, this person is not really healthy, so we're going to help that person get towards health. So if we look at the research, if we look at all the data that's coming out, we know that BMI is not a very good standard of health. Waist circumference is a much better standard because waist circumference looks at where your actual fat lies in the body. If your fat lies in the midsection, if you've got a lot of, visceral and subcutaneous fat, we know that's close to organs, that's active. There's a lot of downside to it. But we also know that your metabolic numbers, so metabolic numbers would be anything related to metabolic syndrome. So high blood pressure, low HDL, high triglycerides, high hemoglobin A1C, your glucose is too high. That is really a better indicator because it's giving you that sign that something is going wrong in the body. So that's really why we said, okay, we're not going to focus on BMI. And people are given this BMI number, it doesn't really mean much. But what we're going to focus on is waist circumference, and then what are the numbers that you have and are they abnormal? And that's essentially how we broke down the metabolic types. So the 4 metabolic types is number 1, and we're talking about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but someone who has a normal waist, normal metabolic numbers, maybe they have some genetics that make them predisposed to fatty liver. So they're going to be the first type. The second is going to be someone who has a normal waist, but they're abnormal in terms of their metabolic numbers. Third would be their metabolic numbers are normal, but their waist is too high. And then the fourth is everything comes together. Waist is too high, metabolic numbers are abnormal. So we really believed, Dr. Ibrahim and I, that when we came up with these types, the more aggressive the recommendation, the more aggressive your type would be. So if you have high waist circumference and your insulin resistance and your triglycerides are high, you might need a little bit of an aggressive approach to reverse the condition.
When we talk about fatty liver disease, are we talking specifically about visceral fat? I spoke with a doctor a couple of weeks ago who was speaking about visceral fat, fatty organs all over the body and the inflammation that came with that and the dangers that came with it from a metabolic standpoint.
Well, we're talking actually about both types of fat. I mean, we're talking about visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, and the key here is that we're really honing in on fat in the liver. Within the liver, you have a normal amount of fat, about 5 to 10%, and that's normal. So once you get over that 10%, then you would be diagnosed with having fatty liver. So we are talking about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. There's definitely this stigma where you have a patient who says like, well, what's wrong? My liver is like screwed up. What do you mean I don't drink? Like, how could that happen? So we're talking, of course, you can get fatty liver from drinking too much too. But what we're looking at here is really kind of the metabolic storm. If you're insulin resistant, if you have a type 2 diabetes, you are much more prone to development of this condition.
Just to contextualize this for people, what exactly does the liver do?
So the liver is involved in every single solitary metabolic moment that we have in the body. So it's involved in blood sugar regulation. When it senses that blood sugar is too low, it works towards releasing blood sugar to make that a homeostasis type. So that's number 1, blood sugar management. It also helps with blood clotting. We know most people know this, that liver helps with detoxification. So we experience toxins within our food. We experience it when we go out for a walk. So something needs to detoxify. Something needs to take those and say, okay, that's not good. Let's convert it and get it out of the body. So the liver takes care of that. The liver is really involved in every single function that the body has. There's over 300 functions that the liver does to keep us healthy and well. And one of the things I tell my patients is like, we never think about our liver until something goes wrong, and then it's the only thing we can think about. So we think about our heart, we think about our brain. Those are really important organs to focus on, obviously. But if your liver's not working, none of those other organs will work as well. And so that's really the connection that I bring, is that it's so important. It kind of like just hangs back and doesn't take any of the limelight that the other organs do. And it takes a beating, but if it starts going wrong, all organs will start failing.
How can people go about renewing their health, but more specifically their liver in this context?
So the liver is the only organ that regenerates, which is like the coolest thing ever, right? Like there's no other organ that regenerates. And I was so lucky to have the experience of doing this book with Dr. Hannah, who's like this world-renowned hepatologist. And he would share case studies with me where you would have two individuals, someone who needs a liver and a loved one. The loved one would donate part of the liver to that individual. And within just about 3 weeks, both livers are back to normal size. It was crazy. It's just crazy how that happens. Basically how we came up with the title of Regenerative, because the liver does regenerate. But we're also looking at it from a health perspective. The good news about this condition, even though 1 in 4 individuals have it, so you walk out you go to the mall today, 1 in 4 individuals that you pass is going to have fatty liver. They may or may not know that. But the good news from the regeneration side is that you can totally reverse it. So as I said earlier, your liver can take a beating. It can get knocked down over and over and over again until it finally says, I'm done. So before you get to that I'm done approach, you can reverse the condition. And some of the ways to do that is really to look at lifestyle. This isn't about alcohol, but reducing alcohol will definitely help, because the liver is completely responsible for detoxifying when we have alcohol come into the system. But really looking at, where are my carbohydrates coming from? Am I eating a lot of ultra-processed foods? Am I eating things that are not tied to fiber? So anything that I always say, like I use sometimes non-medical terms, and I say that anything that makes your blood sugar and your insulin go nuts is going to be very bad for the liver. So that's kind of one way to think about that.
I spoke with a Professor Robert Lustig a few months ago, who has been a proponent of cutting out fructose, high fructose corn syrup and ultra-processed foods from people's diets. And he said that consuming a lot of sugary foods is tantamount to drinking a lot of alcohol because their basis is the same.
Yes, absolutely. So what happens is that the liver becomes really overwhelmed. It is involved in that blood sugar management, the storage. So when we have insulin resistance, or the body's simply not sensitive enough, what happens is the body keeps pumping out more insulin to compensate for the mismanagement of the blood sugar. That then impacts the liver, and the liver starts storing that blood sugar as fat. So that's how kind of the fat formation occurs. And it really doesn't matter if you're having a sugary drink or you're having a pretzel that could be ultra processed. The thing that happens is the same. And that's why I said that it's really tied to fiber. So one of the things I never want my patients to think is, I can't have any fruits because fruit is so sugary. But fruit has a lot of antioxidants, phytonutrients, and it's got a ton of fiber. So we don't put fruit in that category. We're looking at things that have no capacity to slow down the absorption of blood sugar into the bloodstream, right? So when you have fiber, that slows down the process. And I often tell my patients, like, let's look at kind of two different buckets. We can look at a piece of licorice. You take a bite of it and your body's like, this is awesome. I love this. Like, I'm feeling great. You get this high. And your blood sugar, your insulin are like a roller coaster that's really steep. And then you have a really steep drop. But when you have something that has fiber, so let's say like an apple has soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. The body still senses the simple sugar. Oh gosh, we got this simple sugar. This is great. I love it. But then I got this fiber thing. I don't know how to break down fiber. Body just doesn't know how to do it. And so that slows it down. So now you don't have the roller coaster. You've got more of just kind of a roaring hill. And that's a huge difference for how much work the liver has to do to manage your blood sugar.
If you enjoyed that video, I know you'll get some value from this video right here.